Hello and welcome to the Bookmonger. I'm John J. Miller of National Review. Thanks for listening. This show is a production of National Review, and we're recording from the studio WRFH, the campus radio station of Hillsdale College. Our guest is Robby Soave, author of Panic Attack: Young Radicals in the Age of Trump. Robby, why did you want to write a book on today's young radicals?
Thanks for having me, John. So I've been observing the kind of changing tactics of young activists, particularly on college campuses, but also in other places, for many years. And what has begun to interest me more recently is how their tactics have come to threaten principles that I actually really thought are important and that the left used to also think were important, things like free speech and due process. We saw how their increasing interest in not only opposing but actually preventing from speaking speakers on campus that are conservative, or even they're filing complaints to have their professors investigated, even their very far left professors, for saying things in class that offend them for reasons of race and gender and so on. And they're in tension, great tension, I think, with a kind of older ACLU-ish kind of progressivism. Now they say, well, if you're going to have this horrible person that we don't like on campus, this is making us uncomfortable, and that's a form of making us literally unsafe, that it will be violence to have someone we disagree with on campus. And that's really a different kind of situation to be in, I think, for people who want to promote free speech and to have an environment on campus where there is actual room for intellectual diversity. So I was interested in exploring that more and kind of publicizing how things have changed so dramatically.
So things have changed a lot, I guess, since the activism, the student activism from the baby boom era of the 1960s, an era where activism is, at least today, kind of lionized and celebrated.
Yeah, I mean, for the research for my book, I looked back to, the free speech movement came out of the Berkeley in the 1960s, where you had, very progressive students, also conservative students as well. Everyone was really united in casting off these very oppressive speech policies at Berkeley. You couldn't bring anyone from outside the campus to speak without the president's approval. You couldn't advocate for any political issue unless it had narrowly to do with campus politics. And the students rejected this. They said, no, this is tyranny. We should be able to, engage in whatever political advocacy we want, bring in whoever we want. And to make that point, the progressive students they invited an actual Nazi to campus in 1963. And they dressed up in Nazi costumes, actually, to advertise this event. This is the progressive students, totally just to make a free speech point. And nobody felt unsafe. Nobody shouted this guy down. They just kind of laughed at him, right? And that was fine. That's how committed they were to free speech. I mean, contrast that with now. You couldn't, if you have even a far right speaker, let alone an actual Nazi, you have people saying that the campus needs to be shut down, and we would need to have a day of healing, and we would have to open up the mental health facilities of the university to handle the waves and waves of students who will feel literal violence for having had to be in proximity to such a speaker. I mean, it's just completely different. Even though now we're 70 years removed from the threat of Nazism versus 20 when this actually happened in the 60s.
What's the actual state of free speech on our college campuses? Is it as bad as the headlines would make it seem, or do the headlines kind of distort the picture where it's not as bad as they would suggest, and there's actually a lot more debate going on than we recognize? Anyway, what's really going on?
Yeah, so it's. I think it's tempting to call it like a true crisis when it's really more of just a problem. It's certainly the case that on many campuses, you have free speech, you have debate, you have people coming to speak, and no one shuts them down. I mean, even at the campuses where we've seen shutdowns, there might be a shutdown one week, and then next week an event goes off without a hitch. It's it's a little bit random. Certainly, we are paying much more attention to these issues, to what's happening on campus. I mean, national news media are reporting on them in a way that they were not doing so 15 years ago. So when I was at Michigan from 2006 to 2010, a student could have done something really dumb or written a really dumb op-ed for the paper, and it would have been maybe an incident on the campus, but no one, the entire country wouldn't have learned about it. Now they very well might. So paying more attention to the problem might look like it's getting worse when it's actually not. We're just paying more attention to it. So I counsel against making sweeping generalizations about what's happening on campus. That said, I do think it is a problem that many of our most elite institutions, places like Harvard and Yale and Reed and Oberlin and the UC system, and there's been incidents at the Claremont colleges, some of these places that graduate people who will go on to be significant sort of leaders in our country, in industry, in government, in law, and politics. People who will go on to write rules for social media companies for what kind of speech is going to be allowed on their platforms. These people are coming out of some institutions which really have had some problems. Again, not a total crisis, but where the idea of safety as this very broad concept that includes the right to be in an environment where you feel affirmed and comfortable at all times. That's something these elite institutions are fostering. That is going to have an effect on these people and how they view speech, and I think, and what I worry about is that is going to affect what they think the climate of the workplace or of the country should be outside the campus when they move beyond it.
You're listening to The Bookmonger, production of National Review, and I want to tell you about National Review Plus with NR Plus. You get unlimited access to National Review's digital magazine. That means no paywall, all the issues in a 10-year archive, and all the podcasts. But this is more than a digital subscription. It's a membership that includes access to our members-only Facebook page, members-only conference calls with NR writers, editors, and guests, members-only commenting on the site, and a lot fewer ads, including none within articles. To learn more, please go to nationalreview.com/NRPLUS. Robby, free speech obviously is a big theme of your book. Another area you dive into in Panic Attack is due process and Title IX and that subject. Quickly tell us what's going on with due process and what is Title IX? What's the state of all that on campus right now?
Sure. Title IX is a federal statute that forbids gender or sex-based discrimination in education. So it's a perfectly benign statute. It was intended to do good things, to foster equality. It became used under the Obama years it was reinterpreted by a sub-agency of the Education Department to really forcefully prevent sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. And also it defined those subjects in very broad terms that included a lot of speech that I think, and most people would think, ought to be protected. Just any speech that made you uncomfortable for a reason of sex or gender. I mean, this could include, like, actually learning about sex and gender in the classroom could make someone uncomfortable. That would be something the university would have to investigate. And then obviously sexual misconduct as well. And it was the guidance from the government was prescribing very due process unfriendly policies that the universities had to follow, moving the evidence threshold down. They advised against allowing the parties in the dispute to cross-examine each other. Oftentimes, these matters were going to be handled by a single investigator, someone who was deciding who to interview, what testimony was relevant, was not even going to record the conversations, was just going to produce a report based on their impressions of the case, and then submit that to another administrator to determine a punishment. This has resulted in some truly farcical, Kafkaesque proceedings for some people, often young men, often, by the way, young men of color or athletes of color, who have faced, expulsion, suspension, the ruin. To be thrown off a campus for sexual misconduct that's a life-ruining thing to happen. And it was happening because of the Title IX changes. Fortunately, this is the one, good, the silver lining I have in the book. This change to Title IX was undone by the Trump administration, by Secretary Betsy DeVos, very, very wisely undone. Of course, she's been attacked for it and criticized for, this is the Trump war on women or something like that. But it was a smart change. Now, it won't completely fix the problem because the immense bureaucracy hired to adjudicate Title IX under the old new standards, that bureaucracy is not going away, and many of the university presidents vowed to keep doing it the exact same way they were before. It's a real problem. I mean, the courts have said, when many of these students have gone on to sue their universities, and they're winning in court because it's obvious that their rights, even in cases where they're guilty, where they did what they were accused of, their rights were violated because this is totally unfair to do it in such a manner. So it's a very concerning, and of course the activists played a huge role. I mean, there's a Title IX activist group. The leaders of it literally have the numerals 9 tattooed to their ankles. This became such a powerful tool for feminist activism, and they believe the victim mentality, and this was the way of getting that across.
Last question. We have only about 30 seconds, Robby, but you are an associate editor at Reason magazine. What is Reason, and how can our listeners learn more about it?
Sure. Reason is the libertarian publication of free minds and free markets. Please go to reason.com to read all our latest articles. And you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter at Robby Soave, ROBBYSOAVE.
The author is Robby Soave. The book is Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes. Your reviews help new listeners discover us, and it helps us keep this show going. We'll be back next week with a new episode of The Bookmonger.